Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be working on a mixed media piece showing you how you can create a hydrangea flower look using one brush, the filbert brush, to create the petals. It's a simple way to make this hydrangea, and I'm going to show you how you can create it with just a few shades of blue, making a pretty little coaster set. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. It's called Mixing It Up with the Take 5 group. We have 3 hosts today. We have Jeanie with Jeanie's Palette, Mary with the Painted Peach, and Kristi with Funky Junk Inspiration. Now you're going to find the links to their channels down inside of the description box, as well as a playlist for all of the other creators who are joining in on today's Mixing It Up collaboration. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to show you how you can create these pretty flowers using one simple brush.
The brush I'm going to be using to create these hydrangeas is called a filbert brush. It has a rounded tip on the end. It helps create the perfect little rounded petal shapes for this flower. I'm using probably a 6 or a 10 size to create these flowers. I use the smaller one to create the actual project I'm going to work on. But I'm going to be showing you how I load the brush. I load a color on one side and a lighter shade on the other. And then I just simply put the brush down and I start from the outside of my flower and I drag my petal shape in. I'm going to have a variation of color all the way around. I'm going to do anywhere from 3 to 5 petals, and every time I do a stroke, I usually flip my brush and add the different stroke on the opposite side. That way I'm spreading my paint out and adding more of that variegated look. It doesn't really matter either whether or not you do 3 or 5 or 6 or 7. You're going to be layering this flower on top of each other. So in the end, it's going to look great, even if the colors aren't quite blended evenly or if you have more color over the others. I often will go ahead and mix my colors randomly. So I'll pick up a little bit of the dark blue, a little bit of the white blue, lighter blue, and I will mix them on. I'll even use a darker shade as well. Sometimes I just pick up only one color. So basically you're just touching your brush and pulling it towards the center of your flower. If you pull the other way from the outside in, you won't have that rounded edge from the brush. So if you start from the outside of your petal and pull into the middle, the outside of your petal will have that rounded area. When using the filbert brush to create leaves, I load my brush the same way, but this time when I go ahead and add the stroke to my paperwork, I'm going to be keeping my brush on the chisel end, skinny side up, and then I'm going to drag it towards me. That way it helps give a little bit of a point on the end. If I were to hold it flat like I did my flowers, I would end up with more of a rounded bit of greenery, which looks good too. So it just kind of depends on how you would like to go ahead and make your leaf. Often when I'm doing the leaves, I will pick up a lighter shade, and in this instance, I'm going to be using that light shade of blue to create some of the leaf work. You can also create little patterns of leaves that are rounded by just simply tapping your brush up and down and creating small leaf patterns. You can do the same thing to create little buds for your flowers as well. If you'd be interested in getting the names of the colors and the materials I use for this painting, you can pop over to my Ko-fi page, and that's where I'll have a post with all that information. The link to my Ko-fi page is down inside of the description box, so check it out if you might be interested. Now let's get started in painting this pretty set of coasters, all in the shades of blue. The set of wooden coasters I purchased at Walmart. I believe it was made by Plaid. They were a nice quality wood and a nice thickness to create these coasters on. I wanted to have a look of having one big hydrangea when I put all four pieces together. So I put my pieces together and then made sure I started with the circles in the corners to create my process. Again, if you would like to have the colors that I used, you can pop over to my Ko-fi page and get the information from that post. I'm going to be starting with an underpainting, so I'm using this dark shade of blue to create the underpainting for my hydrangea. It's a nice, beautiful shade of dark navy blue, and it's going to make those lighter colors pop right on the top. The outside of the coaster, I was going to be painting this next shade of blue. I do water down my paint a bit. I wanted that look of more of like a stained wood look, and it worked perfect just to slightly water down the paint and go ahead and put it on the sides and the back as well. Once I had the underpainting done, I now start with the leaves. So first I'm going to start in with an underpainting for my leaves, and I'm going to start in with my darkest shade of green that I want for my leaves. Now I'm going to go ahead and start popping in some leaf shapes using between the dark and the light and a little bit of the white colors of paint. I'm also going to be using that light shade of blue to add just that real pretty shade of undercoating of blue on my leaves. I'm using that on the chisel end of my brush, like I showed you earlier, to create the leaf patterns. I want to put the leaves on first because I want the petals to be on top of my leaf patterns. So that's why I start with the leaves first, and I'm going to be building my petals on top. If you might notice, I don't rinse my brush out when doing this process. I only rinse it out when I went to go ahead and do the petal part of my flower. So now I'm going to be layering my different shades of blue on. I'm putting the lighter shades on, 2 different shades of blue. I do mix a little bit of white sometimes into that blue, but I save that for the very top one, so it's a little bit of sparkle that's on the very top. You might notice every time I take a stroke, I usually flip my brush to the other side. That just helps spread the paint out and it goes all the way across my petals. You don't have to be exact with this petal process. You're going to be layering, and like I said earlier, it doesn't really matter if you're pulling exactly 5 times or 3 or just 2. As long as you're layering your petals on top of each other and varying the color of paint, in the end, your eye's going to read it as a hydrangea. Plus, there's one more step to help this flower look like a hydrangea, and that's the center of the flowers. The flowers of the hydrangeas have a small little center area. I'm going to be using a stylus to be able to create these small little random centers. Having that metal end on the stylus, little round ball, really does add a perfect little dot inside of some of the flowers. I don't add them to all of the petal areas of little sections. I add them randomly throughout my flower. It's not important that they actually match up perfectly. Just put some in and your eye will read that this is a hydrangea flower. Now that the base of my flower is finished, I want to add some mixed media elements. These woody water-soluble pencils work great for this. It's a nice soft color crayon look and it's water-soluble. If you add water to it, it's going to soften the lines even more. I love that shade of blue and it works perfect for this item. I wanted to add these items on while they were still wet, so you do need to make sure you're wiping off your items with onto the side so you get some of the acrylic paint off of them. I took my stylus and I went in and did a little sgraffito work, which is just a fancy term for scratching into your surface. I love texture and I wanted to scratch back a little bit on some of these petals. Then I went in with my Kimberly 9XXB pencil, which is a very soft lead and it has some charcoal pencil qualities to it. And I go in and I scratch and use the pencil quality to go over some of my leaves and some of my petals. I'm not going over all of them, and actually I'm just doing kind of a scribbling technique, not trying to copy everything I painted and outlining it like a coloring book, but more of just adding free-form line work and sketch marks on my picture. I went ahead and gave it a dry, and then I took a look to see if I wanted to add more, and I decided to add a little bit more of the color pencil in the background. And I wanted that darker blue shade onto my edges. So I added some of the paint on and then I watered it down and rubbed it back and created a shadow on the edge. And it just really did bring that piece together to have that halo of dark color around the edge. Up next, I wanted to add some soft line work using a Sharpie China marker. The China marker is a perfect tool to add just soft bits of white. Instead of having harsh white lines of paint or some inks, this is just a soft bit of white and it works perfect to add those little areas of bright, soft white into my paintings. Creating mixed media pieces is a dance in between adding things on and subtracting items off as well. Here I'm going to add in a few layers of some filler flowers in the background. I'm using a scruffy brush and taking some white and the light blue colors and tapping in some little forms of white flowers. This white is going to be brighter than the Sharpie China marker I just used and will be another layer of interest into this little painting. I added some white bright dots too, off the end of this flower, just to create more of a lacy feel. I think it's starting to look very pretty. Then I put all of my pieces together and see where I might need to add a little bit more details to bring them all together. Now technically, they probably will never be seen all together in one piece, but it's just the idea. I like that idea of it being one form of artwork. To add another layer of depth to my pieces, I decided to go ahead and take a stamp with some non-legible text on it and stamp it onto my piece. I was going to be using the Stays On ink, which will be permanent once it dries. So I went ahead and I layered some of the text onto the piece, just to give it that next layer of interest. I also thought maybe a few butterflies would look great too. And I had two of these butterfly stamps in my stash. So I had one that was a half butterfly and one that was a full shape butterfly. Once I had them on, I knew I didn't want them to be just all one solid image. So I wanted to layer on something on top. And I decided to do a little bit more of the petal work on top of the flowers. So it looked like my butterflies were a part of my picture and not just sitting on the very top. Like I said earlier, it's that dance of putting things on, taking things off, and adjusting it as you go. And I think it looks so much more prettier to have that butterfly in the back. But I'm not finished with that butterfly. I'm still going to be adding a little bit more interest to that butterfly as well. I did the same process to the butterfly on the bottom, adding a few more petals on the top to make it look like the butterfly was incorporated in and not just sitting on the top. And since I had that paint out, it was a good time to add a few more dabs of petals here and there just to make my hydrangeas look more even. One of the ones had really one dark area and none of the rest really had that. So I wanted to make sure I was incorporating some of that dark blue petals onto some of the other ones as well. To finish off the backs and the sides of my piece, I used that middle shade of blue that I had originally used on the front, and I brushed it across the back in the same manner as I did the front. A little bit of water and brushing it back and forth. I also did the sides and the edges. These were plywood, so it takes a little bit of effort to do the edges. You could have done this probably before you had painted the front, and it would be less chance of spilling over to the front, but I just took care to make sure that I wasn't getting too messy on the sides. I let my pieces dry for just a little bit and took a second look at some of the other elements that I might want to add some more interest to. I took my Posca pen and I added a few little polka dots onto the butterflies just to add a little bit more interest with it's not just so it didn't look like just a flat stamp. I took some of the blue Posca and added some blue to my butterflies. And then I took a little bit of the lighter shade of blue and added that into some of the wings as well. But to settle down that shades of color so it wasn't so bright, I took a paper towel and dabbed over the front and removed some of the paint. I wanted the butterflies to be an element, but not too strong of an element. I wanted the flowers to steal the show. I did the same process to the butterfly down below, the half butterfly, to add a little bit of interest, but not to steal the show, but that you would notice it a little bit more. Posca pens work great for adding just a hint of color and adding dots and other line work into your projects. Up next was to add a little bit of gold to my projects, and I have this round stamp inside of my collection. It's a stamp I go to often. It's got a nice little pattern. I love the fact that it's made from rubber and it bends easily, so you can press it down partially and not have to have a whole image of that particular round circle. Or you can push it down hard and you get the whole circle. That process works great for adding just a hint of gold and slight little pattern to your pieces. I'll include the name of the gold paint inside of that same post inside of my Ko-fi page. You can go there to get all the information of the items that I used to create these with. Once I added the gold to the front of my project, I thought it would look great on the edges as well. Since these wood pieces were made from plywood, the edges were a little rough. So to help me put the paint on, I used a small piece of paper towel, dipped it into my gold paint, and glided it across the edge. And this worked really well to put the gold paint on. On the back side, I did get a little bit of the gold paint over to the back, but I was going to be applying some gold paint there as well, so it was no problem. I just made sure I did it quickly after I had the edges on. I went ahead and I watered down some of the paint, and then I used a wet paper towel and brushed that gold paint all over the back. And that did help remove some of the gold from the edges as well. It worked great to do it this way, and I thought it looked really pretty to have just a blush of gold on the back side. As a final detail for this piece, I wanted to add a little bit of gold splitter splatters on the top. And this Ranger splatter tool works great for adding those little small dots. You just want to make sure you do use it off to the side first before you were to put it over your piece, and then go ahead and flick those little plastic bristles, and it makes a perfect little splitter splatter patterns. Once my pieces were dry, I was going to give 2 coats of this clear coat to finish them. Well, let's see what they look like all finished. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment or a thumbs up if you learned something new today and you might want to try doing this project yourself. Well, thanks everyone for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and watch me again, and next time you'll create right along with me.